Welcome. Good evening for those here, and good morning to those in Singapore. Saturday morning. So, as usual, or maybe unusual with me, because I noticed that I've been doing the meditation or the silence meditation in a different order, but it shouldn't matter. So, we'll first sit in quiet meditation, settling our body and mind. By trying to still the mind and bring it to the pace of a natural breath. And then try to be fully present here. One way of helping to be present mentally would be to pay full attention to the breath and the sensations of the breath. If need be, even count the rounds of breath. Up to say 5, 10, 15. And then let go of the counting and continue to stay with the breath while breathing is happening in its own natural way. And in staying aware of the breath, try to do so alertly, attentively, ardently, which basically means to be deliberately present here, of course not by pushing too hard, but at the same time not being too careless, too relaxed, and try to attend to the object with some intentional effort, and try to do so with a sense of delight, enthusiasm, even maybe sense of purpose, benefit. So at the outset, to set a proper motivation, to a certain extent, the recitation should have helped in bringing our focus here and the purpose behind it and the possibilities ahead of us. What drives us in pursuing Dharma, particularly in the tradition of the Mahayana. So try to renew them, make them stronger. Maybe at this point, to help strengthen that and also make the purpose clearer. Think of sentient beings, or rather, to be practical, human beings, animals that we see on this earth. Think of them and their conditions. More particularly, the recent happenings of natural catastrophes, calamities, like earthquake and others in other parts of the world, particularly Ukraine and as well as Russia. Not just those on the ground, but those at the deciding table, how things might have turned out totally unexpected, and how this is now dragging them all into more suffering, into more uncertainty, and things are going out of their control. So like this, there are sufferings that beings undergo, both those which are out of our control in the form of natural calamities, as well as those that we intentionally create, irrespective of whether we are aware of what we are getting into and how things turn out. Totally different than what might have been expected. So in the Buddhist parlance, such sufferings will come under the suffering of pain, the most gross, superficial suffering. Underpinning them are more serious problems, more serious conditionings that we as human beings and animals and as sentient beings all share in common, in the form of afflictions, actions driven by them, how at every step of our life we fall for the afflictions and suffer the consequences. Many among us may not even recognize those are afflictions, those are trouble sources. And some even see them as something meritorious, something good, something to cultivate, indulge in. Maybe because they are giving them temporary pleasures, and that's all they know in terms of pleasures of happiness. Even in the case of those who know afflictions, recognize afflictions, and know them as a source of problems, and mean to really address them, despite that, not every time do they succeed. The hold of afflictions and its root in the form of ignorance, more particularly grasping at their existence. And it's related secondary inappropriate attentions, distorted perceptions, how the hold of them on us is so strong that even our efforts seem to fall short of actually addressing them as well as we wanted. That means the source for future sufferings still lie in us. Of course, at least our efforts in identifying afflictions for afflictions, for what they do, and trying our best to stay our way away from them, does do pay off. Still, the foundation of that is not even touched. That means the prospect of suffering continues in samsara. And in samsara, there is no future. Yet, efforts at least for many of the human beings, fall short of addressing the problem and see that as a problem and spend all the time in pursuing things that will just stop meaning anything before we even die, let alone have any consequence, any impact, any positive impact in the future, in the time following that. If we have difficulty thinking of what may lie ahead, just think of how we began in this life, how we are so different, how so entrenched the afflictions are. Whereas when it comes to positive things, most of us have to start from the start, as though we came like a blank slate. When it comes to the afflictions, as we come of age, we should be surprised of how masterful we are in those. This should give us some idea of what could lie ahead if we do not address the problem, the source of the problem. As embodied sentient beings, this body, in addition to being sentient under the rule of afflictions, add to the problem. All of our sufferings, problems as sentient beings could be traced to our mental states, our mental dispositions, our mental habits. And just look at oneself and others around us, be that among the leaders, among the businessmen, among those who have the say in writing the laws, enforcing them, executing them, interpreting them. See how we as a whole of humanity, how far we have succeeded, or where are we? Where do we stand in really pointing our finger at the right culprit, the right source, the correct source of all the problems? Thinking along these lines, supported by one's own experiences here and there when some problems happen, chain reactions happen, how they could be traced back to the afflictions. Feel more inspired, encouraged to put more effort in one's spiritual practice, not just for one's own sake, but to become an exemplary achiever in the right sense, the whole of the humanity. By gaining confidence in what we teach, what we show, what we share, having learned it through one's own experience. Let's look up to the Buddha as a role model and determine to spend the rest of our life in walking in his footsteps, in achieving what he achieved, and being able to do what he is able to do, what he was able to do, still continues to benefit us. May what we share, learn, hear, discuss in this session contribute in whatever way possible towards putting us on the track to becoming Buddha. For the sake of all sentient beings. Okay. So last time we stopped at the last paragraph of page 280. We'll push through this today. Afflictions are rooted in the ignorance that misapprehend reality. That part, to a certain extent, we can all relate to, particularly when it happens to be very gross affliction. We may call it ignorance or not, but something which misapprehends the reality, be that on any level, on gross level, in thinking what somebody did when they didn't do, or in thinking that they will keep doing it, they will last forever, etc., etc. Some may not be that apparent in having fueled the affliction in that way, but if we look deep down, we could see seeds of them kind of supporting the affliction. So here in Buddhism, just as with many of the topics, ignorance too is dealt in steps. So the ignorance being recognized here in terms of misapprehending reality, that too, with regard to whether or not things, including oneself, are inherent existent or not, this is going to the subtlest of the ignorances. But then, before we reach there, in the scriptures, it kind of presents levels to gradually zoom in to the actual culprit, the right, correct, fundamental, last culprit. But before doing that, it recognizes the scriptures present by way of the schools of tenets present grosser level of ignorance, which all of them do contribute to the afflictions, but they all fall short of being the ultimate ignorance, in that just merely getting rid of them, even uprooting them, which wouldn't be possible without uprooting, grasping that it had an existence, but nonetheless, even hypothetically thinking that they have been uprooted, the problems, let alone problems, sufferings, but even afflictions would not have gone away. But nonetheless, they are presented as a stepping stone, as a way of kind of training us in refining our understanding of what lies at the root of the afflictions. And we call that ignorance, not in a naive sense of not knowing and not knowing, right? Which could also be kind of ignorance, but that's not so serious than this kind of ignorance, which is being pointed here as being in the form of a misapprehension. I like to call it misknowledge, right? Because some really take it as a knowledge, as something that they can defend and they advocate this. Whereas what it has happened, what it has become is complete diametrically opposite. Okay, it sounded a little different than what I knew. Yeah, rather to something which is diametrically opposite to the actual mode of existence. So it's very interesting. The ignorance revolves around the mode of existence of things, which means about reality. And it is this ignorance is so screwed, so misconstrued, in that it not only gets the reality wrong, but gets it totally diametrically opposite. So it makes sense for it to be a source of problem, at least, because it is against the reality, not just against, but completely opposite of the reality. That means following it, everything that comes after it comes from it, and then if they drive us into our actions or whatnot, with every step we will be going further and further and further away from the reality. That means quoting problem. Nobody wins against reality. If one knows what the reality is and if one intentionally tries to go against it, that means one is, we have a saying in Tibetan, which means, of course, quoting problem. It's almost like saying, paying for problems to be paying for problems to be had. It's like, please give me problem. I'm short of problem and give me more problem, right? So that's what it is. So here, and you'll be surprised, or maybe not, you already know about this. In Lamrim, it comes very clearly. In the section on the, what do you call, small scope and middling scope practice. Their ignorance identified is in accordance with at least what the texts written by Asanga and others identify. I say text written by Asanga, allowing that maybe Asanga himself held some other view. See, in Buddhists, we have such cases. Authors writing, but writing with a purpose, keeping a space between what they write, what they really hold, all driven by compassion, love, not that how this would sound best. I might get Nobel Prize. Nobel Prize. Even Nobel Prize, you have to leave behind. Okay, so you will notice that so ignorance. There is a shift that gradually comes in the recognition of in the identification of the ignorance, eventually to this grasping at inherent existence as the ignorance, as the source of all problems of afflictions in the Prasangika Madhyamika. But before that, less subtle, more gross levels of misunderstandings are constituting the ignorance. Anyway, afflictions are rooted in the ignorance that misapprehends reality. That's a general statement. Now, when Venerable zooms in to recognize this even more clearly, ignorance grabs a phenomena as inherent existence, then this is the ignorance in the Prasangika Madhyamika system. Whereas reasoning proves that in reality phenomena are empty of inherent existence. Yeah. What do we mean by inherent existence? How do things lack inherent existence? Is some big topic of its own. It needs to be really pursued seriously. And those of us who have taken Bodhisattva vow and in further Tantric vow, the vows themselves contain precepts about visiting the understanding of emptiness on a daily basis. Yeah, sometimes we get this idea that inherent existence is equivalent to independent existence. And since we know things are dependent, that means we know they are not independent. I got it. Inherent things are not inherent existence because they are not independently existent, because they are dependent, because they are dependent on causes, parts, and we leave out the next one. What about dependence on designation? That part not needed because once, even with the first two, I understand dependent, which means they are not independent, which means they are not inherent existent. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Whereas this is talked about as being very difficult, particularly understanding it correctly in the sense that while it is understood fully, there's no damage done on the conventional reality. Conventional reality even gets more boost. Yes, you are conventionally real because you are inherently not existing. That's how it should be. And whereas this lack of inherent existence, when pursued to its right extent, is supposed to rule out even the slightest tinge of objectivity, which means not existing from their side. they do exist, they don't exist from their side. Now, what other option is left than for them to exist from this side? Yet at the same time, they play their regulated role of cause and effect in a very infallible way. It's not a hodgepodge, anything goes, or kind of a cheap relativism, everything goes, but rather you need to have this for to have this. You need to have this for this. This needs to precede this. There is this infallibility, incontrovertibility. Oh, about the causation. And that is supposed to be even further affirmed with the understanding of the correct emptiness. So that's why you may have seen in Lamrim Chemo, I think in the Lakdong chapter, maybe towards the end, maybe either at the end of the Lakdong, the special treatment of the wisdom, or at the regulated, at the regular training treatment of the wisdom. Somewhere there is a stanza in a long, what do you call, interval, long interval where Tsongkhapa takes time in writing in verses. I have to really prepare for saying verses. Yeah. Where he says that, I know, he calls us, those who are pursuing emptiness, friends. Friends in the Madhyamika. Friends pursuing Madhyamika. I know, I understand. In your mind, when you uphold things being empty of inherent existence, you have difficulty affirming, you have difficulty, you have difficulty defending causality. But that will, I can relate to that, that will feel like that, but feel assured. Stick to your position. Don't give in to easy way out. What would be an easy way out? Pardon? Nothing exists. That would be the easiest way. Or nothing could be said about it. It cannot be known. Don't you hear it is said ineffable? Don't need to speak about it. Or you could hold the position that I have no position, so I do not incur any fallacies. It's you who say this is this and this is this, this is it. Whereas I don't say this is this. I don't dare to say book, this is book. Because the moment I say this, I land on something non-book. So I have no position of it being a book. So I incur no fallacies. And if this is not book, then somebody is not the producer of the book. So I don't have to worry about it. Anyway, so he says, I can relate with you. This would feel like this, but don't give in easily to saying, I have no position. I have no tenets. That I am skeptical to the furthest point. I uphold skepticism to the furthest point. So there is no position. Rather hold on to that, stay with it for a while, even if inconvenient, feeling and knowing that this is the right track to Madhyamika. and then the following verses points to where else one might want to run into to feel comfortable. So it's definitely not looking for things here and there and here and there and say I cannot find it. That's an indication. That's an indication of how things lack inherent existence. But that is not it. Okay. Yeah. Since ignorance does not rest on a valid foundation, it can be overcome by the wisdom realizing emptiness. So, as I said, as I shared the last time, the initial stages of spiritual practice until we get to the first gate, and then even after that, through the second gate, things will be not easy. It will almost feel like taking one step ahead, 2 steps, 3 steps, 10 steps, who knows, 100 steps back. It will feel like that. And then that's because the hurdles on the way in the form of the afflictions have been so habituated within us. We're talking of long span of time. As I like to joke, the eternity going in the past. We have been so blindly following the directions of self-centeredness and self-grasping to such an extent that these afflictions have really gained stronghold within us, and they're not going to give in and give up easily. That's the reason why all our efforts, even if be on the right track, fall short of that strength to really make them unsettled. But then one has to push on. And that's the reason why, the 7 Buddhas, among so many Buddhas, why some 7 are singled out. I have come across accounts saying that those are role models people ask to follow because they persisted despite the hardships, and they didn't give up. I think in one of the Lojong texts, they are given as an example of how efforts are required and how efforts will pay off. Because when we are dealing with ignorance, we're not just merely done with exposing it, but we have to kind of move it and root it out. And that's difficult because it has taken root so deep down because of our habituation for so long, almost without even the slightest inkling that there could be some other way of looking at things. And that's how we kept on going for so long. And to a certain extent, it's apparent. It's apparent if we look inside. When we sometimes find grasping at inherent existence or grasping at something solid, something objectively out there, we haven't learned, except with few exceptions, we haven't learned them in any school, right? And we haven't gone through any training in kind of thinking that way. But this is so much part of ourselves, and that in such a degree, to such a degree of depth and embodiment. And then likewise the afflictions. I mean, when we talk of positive qualities like love and compassion, whatever amount of love and compassion we are capable of generating, say naturally or over time without being taught or whatnot, is so much mixed with attachment. And it's so clear because our compassion just goes only so far, right? Whereas when it comes to anger, jealousy, greed, we do not know any race, any any culture, any religion, whoever it happens to be that we think is problem creator. It's just so easy to extend it. It's not like, it will not go there, right? It doesn't know any race, culture, whatever, gender, anything. So long as we feel justified, we can so easily. And sometimes we don't have to even wait for feeling justified. It just pops up. And that's indication of how habituated we are. And then on the other hand, how habituated in that direction is clear from how difficult it is to understand, to even buy into the idea that there is no inherent existence. Even when we buy into it, we accept it, how difficult it is to really wrap our head around it. Even the text, like Tungapas, very clearly explain it. We can just follow the words and the words, and then we can see how he is consistent all throughout. I mean, it must mean this. We get some idea, but in terms of ingraining it, even intellectually understanding it squarely is so difficult because once we hold on to this, it seems to have problem with this. Once we hold on to this, it seems to have problem with this. It seems not to fit in. And then when, say, we have understood it, how difficult it is to kind of bring it down to our heart and try to kind of train our heart in really seeing it in that way and eventually in a natural way. That's so difficult. And these are all indications of how we have been so much habituated in the opposite side. So it's not merely exposing it, proving it wrong, but kind of getting the hold of the grasping within us away. Since ignorance does not rest on a valid foundation, so that's something. Here it is. Here the statement is premised on the assumption that we understand ignorance to be not resting on a valid foundation. But that itself is very difficult. We need to put in efforts. Since ignorance does not rest on a valid foundation, it can be removed, overcome by the wisdom, realizing emptiness. In our daily life also, we can make some comparisons. How totally mistaking something and believing in it blinds us to other realities. And then when we stick to that belief, wrong belief, how it's difficult for us to learn the correct way. And in the meantime, so much of the damage would have been already created, loss. In the scripture, it gives the example of a father who thought or believed that his own son was the one who was killed, whom the corpse he saw, and he believed in it so much so. When the son returned back and knocked at the door, father said, "No." Right? There is a story there in the sutra. This is how wrong view can be so blinding. And then more so when we give credence to it for so long and give it the safe haven within our heart, cuddle it, and then kind of really protect it, then it's even more difficult to make inroads in it. When ignorance is severed from its root, the afflictions that depend on it are also eradicated and can never return. Excellent qualities such as compassion cannot be undermined by wisdom because they rest on a valid foundation. Or rather say, they can rest on a valid foundation, but as ordinary beings, just about anything we generate, be that compassion, love, whatever, tolerance, etc., or belief, faith, confidence, those should all be grounded on inherent existence. So, in that sense, such kind of a compassion can be affected when we understand the lack of inherent existence. Whereas compassion doesn't need that. It can be not only built on the basis of true understanding of the mode of existence of things, but even get more boost from it by seeing the suffering even more clearly, and because of that, the strength of the compassion can be even stronger and whatnot. So compassion doesn't need to rely on grasping at inherent existence. Likewise, grasping mistakenly at permanence, etc. But unless we deal with afflictions, more particularly the grasping, just about, and on the other hand, kind of fuel it even more, or kind of support it or buy into it, its story, then just about anything we cultivate will be positive, but nonetheless rooted in, or kind of grounded or founded on grasping that inherent existence. Fortunately, grasping that inherent existence is not inherently negative. It is neutral by its nature. It's quite strange. It is neutral by its nature. It is not positive, not negative. It cannot be positive. I don't know if we could say it can be negative. It can become negative. I don't know. Or it could be colored negative. It could be colored positive. If we want to say there can be compassion grounded on grasping an innate existence, then it could come in all three colors, but by itself, it is neutral. And that's the reason why compassion, even bodhicitta, when it is grounded on, or rooted on, founded on the grasping an innate existence, the bodhicitta may help in direct whatever we do towards prepare whatever we do towards enlightenment. But in terms of actually making it happen, it will not, so long as it is founded on grasping the existence. Rather, it will be constrained. Its actual effects would be constrained within the boundaries of samsara. Although In the meantime, it could prepare virtues that could be aimed at enlightenment, but in terms of actually making the move, I was saying, right, it's almost like getting your ducks in a row, but making them move. Speaking of ducks, I have seen so many of them in Atlanta. Oh, when they move, it's so beautiful. With the parents, one at the two ends. It's so interesting, and the chicks just following them, right? Yeah. So it's like getting the ducks in line, and then just they are just waiting for the order to move, and the order never comes unless until we generate push and generate and come closer to understanding of emptiness. Okay, when ignorance is severed from its root, the afflictions that depend on it. So in the case of the ignorance equated with grasping the inherent existence, that's what all afflictions depend on. When it comes to wrong perceptions or wrong distorted perceptions in the form of lesser distortions, like gross concept of selfhood, grosser concept of wrong selfhood, wrong notion of selfhood, etc. There can be afflictions which depend on them or do not depend on them. And so that's the reason why there is this expression. In the Prasangika Madhyamika philosophy, there's this expression. Afflictions unique, I just put it, afflictions unique to the Prasangika Madhyamikas. Not in the sense that when you become Prasangika Madhyamikas, you have those afflictions. But unique in that only the Prasangika Madhyamikas are able to identify them and see them, not just identify them, but see them as afflictions. Others just don't see them. They just overlook them. They recognize something else as afflictions, which are afflictions on the afflictions like anger, jealousy, greed, whatnot, but only those who are, which are founded on grosser concepts of selfhood, be that the concept of self-sufficient personhood or even more grosser, seeing self as being totally outside of the body, outside of the aggregates. So those, and also seeing permanent, impermanent things as permanent, those distortions can also give rise to afflictions. But they nonetheless have to necessarily deep down be, rooted in the grasping at inherent existence. But then in the case of the Prasangika Madhyamikas, not only those afflictions identified by the others are rooted in the grasping at inherent existence, but there can be afflictions which are solely only rooted in the grasping of inherent existence, not other grosser graspings. And that's why there is this expression, Arhats in accordance, how do I say it? Arhats in accordance with the Abhidhamma presentation are not arhats in actuality from the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view. So we have this expression. Someone that we have all along been thinking as arhats now have become arhats with a qualification. Arhats of the Abhidhamma. which means you still have some way to go. But that's not to say that Theravada arhats are not arhats. That's not to say, because there can be Theravats who are Prasangika Madhyamikas. Yeah, right? And there can be so-called Mahayanas who are whose philosophy, whose how do you call level of wisdom falls short of Prasangika Madhyamika. So it's not to equate Abhidhamma with the vehicles. Tenet schools and vehicles are different. So Gombanishiva Tajumbai, they are arhats in accordance with the Abhidhamma, or arhats mentioned in the Abhidhamma. Because mentioned in the Abhidhamma would be in the sense that arhats which qualify the arhathood as criteria, fulfill the criteria as explained there. And that would fall short of the standard that the Prasangika Madhyamikas have put up. Anyway, when ignorance is severed from its root, the afflictions that depend on it are also eradicated and can never return. Now, this irreversibility, how do we make a case for that? Because that's pointing to the truth of cessation, right? That's pointing to the truth of cessation. Truth of cessation begins from the Arya path, and whatever it is a cessation of, that would have been totally rendered irreversible from that point on, and it kind of becomes increasingly so with other afflictions when we attain more cessations. Excellent qualities such as compassion cannot be undermined by wisdom, because they rest on a valid foundation. Yeah, so compassion, love, all of these qualities do not have to depend on grasping at inherent existence. In a way, that's the reason why even when we come very often come across expressions like compassion that we generate has so much room to be refined. With each additional wisdom, understanding deeper and deeper reality, it becomes more and more refined. More and more refined in one way, in a sense of being grounded more and more firmly on reality, and then in other sense also, in that it begins to see the root of the suffering that it is concerned about more and more clearly, and able to really pinpoint where the source is, and thus a compassion accompanied with the confidence, a confidence, a compassion accompanied with a sense of a way out of how sentient beings, with a clarity of how sentient beings suffer, what would be the way out. That's how compassion would become even more informed with the reality, and more grounded, more, what do you call, inspired. So here, Venerable quotes Dharmakirti from the chapter first of Pramana Vartika. She has chosen to put the two stanzas, apparently stanzas 220 to 21, in prose form. I've tried to restore the verse form of it, and let's see how it reads. I borrowed words that Venerable has used here, but put them in the verse form. And this is quite deep in the chapter first, towards the very end of it. And much of this theme about the possibility of liberation, about how afflictions can be completely rendered non-returnable, irreversible. This is mainly the theme in the second chapter, but in the first chapter too, in this particular quote, it dwells on it, and it's quite something. Although it wouldn't be that easy to buy into it. So the stanza. This is the stanza which deals with logically proving that there can be beings, or rather humans, who would have eliminated the pollutants, eliminated to the extent of having rendered them irreversible. And because of that, liberation eventually is possible. So this stanza, the 220, somewhat reads like this. All the occurrence of decrease and increase corresponds with their counterforces. Inculcating them, that is the counterforce upon the mind, inculcating them will turn it into the nature. That is why some beings can eliminate their contaminations. So what it is actually saying is, if we look inside, we can see how, say in the case of love against hatred, when love increases, hatred decreases, right? When love decreases, hatred increases, or when hatred is very strong, then love would have hard time showing up. Right? So this correspondence, or rather in this correlation with the counterforce, say in this case, understanding of selflessness, of emptiness, this occurrence of decrease and increase in a very regular, in a very consistent form, in regard in regard to counterforces, it's showing something. What does it show is that if we inculcate the counterforces upon the mind consistently, then it will decrease the afflictions. And not just that, in the meantime, it would itself befriend with the nature of the mind. Because it is rooted on reality, it would have more, it would have more more possibility, more feasibility in almost blending into the nature of the mind. That's the reason why some beings who are persistent on their path can eliminate their contaminations, because of what this correlation we see between the counterforce on the one hand and their corresponding afflictions. They kind of do not stay. They do not go like this together, right? If one goes up, one goes down. When the counterforce goes high, the afflictions go low. Does it ring a bell? Okay. The expression. And then this is in response to opposition and objection, saying, yes, some efforts may lead to decrease of afflictions, but it will come back. just as it does with all of us. So here is making the point about something that is not seen, but of which the indication is apparent within us of this correlation. This is even stronger than a correlation, not just correlation. It is stronger than that. Right? It's not just happening by random or with no reason, but there is a consistency in this, and that is pointing to the possibility of eliminating the pollutants, because the pollutants show this tendency of decreasing when the counterforce is increasing, and that it does so consistently. So if only we make efforts in inculcating the counterforce, building it upon the mind, then it will, because of it's rooted in reality, it will incline into the nature of the mind. And then they say, yeah, even if you gain some level of elimination of the afflictions, they will come back. But Dhammakirti is saying that no, here, and he is asking, by what reason would it come back? Would it come back because such a cessation has flaws, that you see flaws in such cessation, or you neither see qualities, excellences, nor flaws in them? Because of that, these cessations would just revert back to this stanza 221, of which here it is, the nature of the mind is such that it is free of pollutants, and by nature a mind that has realized emptiness has a real undistorted object. As such, it cannot be counteracted by what is opposite to it, because even if one were to attempt to do so, the mind is naturally inclined towards its nature. So here the response is saying the agonies of samsara are absent. When such a cessation is attained, the agonies of samsara is absent, so flawless. So it will be flawless. Even if one were to search for flaws, you wouldn't find. So seeing flaw will not be a reason for it to revert back. And even if a mind deluded on reality were to counteract it, even if a mind deluded on reality were to counteract such a cessation would not be reversed, even in such a case, because the mind is now naturally inclined towards its new object. It has gained a well-founded reality, a well-founded object. Now it's not going to give up. Whereas all along, up until now, it has been holding on to a totally wrong, foundationless, right? Baseless object. But then the crucial thing for this is to prove the relationship between afflictions and the so-called ignorance, and how the counterforce that we are talking of can be built in its strength in really what do you call giving a death blow, that combating it forcefully to the extent of uprooting it. Okay, maybe with this we have finished the chapter, and maybe reflections we can leave for next time. Let's see. This is an interesting question here. Okay. I have several questions, but I didn't leave enough time. Next time I'll remember to leave more time. Last week, you emphasized how the afflictions are our true enemy. If I remember correctly, during one of the illumination of the intent reviews. Whoa, way back. Was it last year? You mentioned that bodhisattvas do not fight the afflictions as forcefully, as strongly as fundamental vehicle practitioners. Can you explain this a bit more? I still struggle with conveying it properly in English. And this is true only with the bodhisattvas, of advanced path, the Arya bodhisattvas, who would have gained some confidence over the afflictions. And it's almost like they would have totally shaped off the afflictions. Their thorns would have already been shaped off by them. Now they are just mere balls they can play with. Through. So if they need some nails to be put into the wall, they can use this to put it into it. So that means they have gained some control over the afflictions, so much so that now they do not have to be always after them. In a way, they could even wait for time for them to be used into something beneficial to others, by which the force against the afflictions would have already gained. So apparently they would be seen like, what do you call, guarding the affliction, or even nurturing them, which they don't do at all. But what they're doing is, by way of utilizing them, they are using them against them. And this is true for Sutra bodhisattvas also, but not with every affliction. The one affliction that has been singled out for such bodhisattvas to be able to utilize for the benefit of human beings, benefit of sentient beings, and thereby gain their collection of merit, and thus build the force stronger, more against the afflictions themselves, is the attachment, particularly that of lust. They can keep themselves being overwhelmed by them, yet at the same time utilize them into an intended purpose, mainly procreating beings, sons and daughters, who then go out and serve the humanity. So they would have gained that kind of a confidence. And this is, whereas it is very clearly spelled out that when it comes to ignorance, when it comes to wrong views, Sutra bodhisattvas just cannot play with them, cannot get, what do you call it? Cannot get something off them. They cannot get any good of them. Cannot get any good out of them, and they have to just be after them and eliminate them. Whereas when it comes to attachment, they can the Arya bodhisattvas, even in the sutra system, have gained the confidence of not being overwhelmed by them, not being overwhelmed by them, but rather the confidence in utilizing them for the service of sentient beings, which would only increase their merit, and thus their force of merit, their collection of merit, and only work against afflictions. And this is particularly spoken of in the case of bodhisattvas who take rebirth under the force of, again, Mönlam, under the force of Mönlam, and under the force of aspiration, under the force of compassion. But there are others who can, and these bodies are not mental bodies. But then if they want to generate mental bodies, have mental bodies by which they could then go at speed of light, or even faster than that, into after other universe, other multiverse, whatnot. Then they take the mental body. For that, the source is not compassion, and of course there will be compassion and there will be aspiration to serve others, but the main force that goes into creating that kind of a body would be Marikbhaja, the subtle latencies of afflictions or ignorance. Not the ignorance itself, but its non-seed latencies, non-seed imprints, together with their sapamebele, together with unpolluted action, which means unpolluted, unafflicted, free from affliction, free of affliction stain, yet in the form of an aspiration to be born somewhere. Those two combined would serve like the two main causes to generate to take on a mental body. But then, in the case of as one advances in the path, when it comes to Vajrayana and the highest yoga Vajrayana, then they are capable of handling. They are capable of turning the afflictions against the afflictions. Does it make sense? Turning the table against them, turning the afflictions against afflictions, which means they are able to use more affliction, more variety of afflictions, and that too also in more variety of ways against the afflictions themselves. So in Buddhism, one thing which is very clear, and I heard this His Holiness emphasize very clearly, in Buddhism, at all given levels of vehicles, practice, whatnot, afflictions are ultimately to be eliminated. Not a single affliction is exceptional. But when it comes to doing that, as one advances, it could be seen differently. Right? Like utilizing them against them is, and thereby not earnestly getting after them, but in a way meeting them and utilizing them against them. That's not the case with the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha Arhats. They just have to, whenever affliction arises. So the Tibetan term is Chetu Nyenne Mipong. And that's what I think comes to intentionally, deliberately, but still it doesn't seem to convey completely in English.
That would be from Mahayana Sutras.
But
so these ideas come from Mahayana Sutras.
Yes.
Not the tantric stuff you're talking about, but when you're talking about on the sutra level.
Yeah.
So this use of attachment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. It clearly spells out in regard to the qualities of Lamshe. We speak of Lamshe, Shishe, Lamshe, and Namke, Chensum. We speak of three. In English, it falls short when I say knowledges. Three wisdoms. Wisdoms of the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddhas. They are called Shishe. And then those of the Bodhisattvas on the Sutra level are called Lamshe. And that of the Buddhas are called Namchen. And they are all Arya paths. So in the case of the Lamshe, the Bodhisattvas, it speaks of 5 qualities, out of which one of it is this one, being in the nature of utilizing afflictions for the service of others. And it singles out it is only the attachment, not the others. Yeah, we're already out of time. So there's no point to push through this. But I would like to comment on the question that we had last time, which was about nominal. I don't know if that's what the person, that's what may be troubling the person in calling it merely nominal or not, but I suspected it. Because in English, when you say nominal head, which means name, head only in name with no power, then that might equate to saying if everything is nominal, it might come to meaning that things are mere name, they are not capable of function. That's not the case. Things are capable of their own unique functionality, even more so by virtue of being just merely dependently arisen, and thus by virtue of being lacking inherent existence. So here, nominal is not short of functionality, or short of functionality, short of power. But here it's different. Here, nominal in the sense of mere designation. Okay, we will stop it here. And yes, I would like to ask our Singaporean audience to think more about the connection between the afflictions and the ignorance, and how the ignorance is identified here. See whether that connection you could make, you could support it, you could gain some evidence from your own experience. Do you find, first of all, see if you have grasping at selfhood with regard to oneself, with regard to others. If so, is that something that is connected with the afflictions that you generate? If so, to what extent? How would the affliction react if that were to be taken away? So that's something to think about. With this food for thought, I will leave it here. That's now dedicated.